Dr. Price will join me a little later to talk about some of this information. But I'm going to give you some background on state spent funding as well as district budget, not specifically about differences in Prop 30 and 38, although you will see some mention of that, but an overall picture of our district's budget, kind of how we got to where we are now. So this is one that you've seen some charts that Jonathan presented before. This graph to me is extremely informative and extremely discouraging. What you're going to see is how California per pupil funding compares to the national average. And you'll notice, try this, see if this one works here. Good. You'll notice up to about here, we had some years that we were above the national average. The flat line is the national average. And then we started to go below and increasingly below. Coincidentally enough, if you look at when we started to slip from above the national average to below the national average, it was after 1978. And that's not going to be a surprise because, as Jonathan mentioned, Proposition 13 came in 1978, and funding has really changed dramatically over a period of time, but starting at that time. We had some years that no time since our funding went below the national average was it good, but we had some times when the economy in California was a little better and it improved, but you can really see how bad it's gotten recently. And this shows you that as of 2010-11, this is just a little bit old, we were spending in California more than $2,800 less per pupil than the national average. Now, if you're comparing us to the highest spending states, it would be even a more dramatic difference because some states literally spend twice as much money per pupil as California. But just the national average, we're considerably lower, as you can see, and it's been getting much worse. So how does California stack up in a number of different areas? Some of this information has actually been updated, and I'll explain some of it. It says K-12 spending per student as of 2009-10, we were ranked 44 out of 50. Well, that unfortunately has changed. We're now ranked 47 out of 50. K-12 spending as a percentage of personal income, and this is important to know. What do we spend per pupil as a percentage of personal income? 46 out of 50. The number of students per teacher, this doesn't mean in every single class, but if you take all of our teaching staff and all of our students, what is the ratio? We're dead last, 50. Number of students per administrator, and that is very important because the administrators at the school level help to make the school function, 46 out of 50. In terms of counselors, we're 49th. And in terms of librarian, we're not only dead last, but we're far beyond any of the other states. So there's a direct correlation between our per pupil funding and where we rank in terms of essential services for students in California. This is a chart, and by the way, I want to thank Dr. Price for putting many of these slides together. Some we took out of other presentations, some he created. This is one we like to call the alligator chart because it kind of looks like an alligator. It really shows what's happened since 2007-8, the year that we say the Great Recession really began, and you start to see diverging lines between the level of funding that we were told we would get per pupil compared with what we did get. And I want to start by explaining that Jonathan was using a figure of total dollars per pupil in California that tends to include money beyond the per pupil revenue limit funding. That will include various state categoricals. We talk about the revenue limit funding, which is a smaller percentage because that's pretty much a constant from school district to school district, with a few exceptions. Some of the other money will vary widely with the kinds of students in a district and how much of the categorical they receive. But you can see back in 2007-8, we were getting a little bit less than $5,800 per pupil on the revenue limit. Then you can see where the line goes based upon Proposition 98 statutory requirements, how much we were supposed to receive if we had continued to receive the various cost of living allowances that were written into Proposition 98. Well, the green line will show you how much we actually received, It went down dramatically in 2008-9, and then even more so in 9-10, came up a little bit, down a little bit. It's been fairly level, but that level is at considerably less than we received in 2007-8. It's about 90% of what we received in 2007-8, and it's only about 80% of what we should be receiving now, because this blue line and the difference here is roughly about a 20% difference. Now, what about the red line? That's the trigger that could be pulled if state revenues come in lower as a result of the November election. In other words, that's what would happen in revenue if Proposition 30 does not pass, because the state budget, as Jonathan explained, assumes that the money from Proposition 30 is in the budget. If it does not pass, money is taken out, and that's what the per pupil funding would look like. And actually, this line is a little bit outdated. It drops off even a little bit more now. It's about $457 per pupil that would be taken out of the current year funding if Proposition 30 doesn't pass. In our district, that's a little bit more than $2 million. Now we're going to talk about what has actually happened in South Pasadena during the period of time that we've been experiencing these cuts, and how has the district tended to cope. What cuts have we made, and how have we avoided making some even greater cuts? Well, we made some reductions in positions. We reduced a teacher specialist in the district office, half of a position working in instructional services. We reduced half of a clerk position in the district office. We did eliminate one of our arts teachers at the elementary school. We also eliminated, and it doesn't mention these here, but I wouldn't want to leave these out, we eliminated some counseling positions, 2 at the high school and 1 at the middle school. We consider these important positions. We also stopped putting money in the last year and continue to have a budget that shows we would not be adding money to deferred maintenance, which means the money we put into maintaining our facilities, we can only budget by not putting money into deferred maintenance. We also reduced by about 10% the amount of money that each school gets to operate its own budget within the school. And it's, I hate to use the word, but it's a pitiful amount to begin with. And we had to reduce that by 10%. We received categorical money from the state that used to be designated for only certain programs, such as textbooks and some other programs. We were given the option of sweeping that money into the general fund budget. So when we did that, we used that money to pay the salaries of some people that would have otherwise not been able to maintain jobs, teachers and support personnel. And in doing that, by sweeping those categoricals, we have reduced funding that would have gone to schools for intervention teaching, for professional development, and for supplementary instructional materials. So some of these services to schools have been reduced because we've needed to keep some teachers and other personnel employed. We were putting money aside for future textbook adoptions. Let's see, go back. We were putting money aside for some future textbook adoptions. Well, our current budget shows we can no longer afford to do that. So when new textbooks are required in a few years, when the new core California state core standards have been adopted and new textbooks are required, we at this point are not putting money aside for those textbooks. We don't have the money. We've also reduced positions when we raised class sizes in our secondary schools. When we went from 34 students in a class up to 36, that reduced some positions. And we've done a great deal of reducing of expenditures that used to go to outside contractors. And an example of that is we now do just about all of our maintenance work with our own staff, even if it means some projects have to be put off for quite a bit longer because we no longer have the budget to bring in as many outside contractors to perform some of the work. Those are just some examples of the cuts. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit about what our budget looks like in the current year and what it would be projected to look like over the next 2 years. But this one would assume that we haven't cut any positions. Now, this isn't going to be the true budget, but this is what it would look like if we didn't make any cuts in positions. And I'm going to explain that, hold on a second. I'm going to explain that we begin by looking at what the budgeted revenues are, and you can see that from 2012 2013 to the next year, we've lost almost, well, it's a little bit less than $2 million because there's some COLA written in to Prop 98 funds, which we may or may not receive, but about $2 million is lost because of the parcel tax that we currently have that will go away at the end of this year. Then you can see that it goes up again slightly in 2014-15, but again, that's based upon a cost of living allowance that we've been told to put in our budget, but the last several years, that cost of living allowance has not been funded. So there's a good chance that will come back out. Now we're assuming that Proposition 30 does not pass, and we would lose about this much money this year and in the next 2 years from the state trigger cuts at about $457 per pupil. So these are our total revenues under that assumption for this year, and for 2013, 14, and 15, we lose the Proposition 30 money, and we also lose the parcel tax money. You can see our total expenditures, because we haven't cut any positions in this scenario. You can see what a structural deficit would look like from about 3 million to about 4.7 million and so on. And we are required by the county to maintain an ending fund balance each year of over 3%. Well, with this assumption, we've been able to start off with a relatively healthy fund balance because of all those cuts I mentioned, and because we've had the parcel tax, but then it goes down dramatically to about 5%, and then look at that. It goes down to almost -8. This is because we are assuming that all of the employees who are currently in our district would remain. Well, we're not going to be able to meet our economic responsibilities if that happens, so we've created a budget that's more realistic. This assumes that the same assumptions, Proposition 30 does not pass because we can't count on that money. It assumes that the parcel tax ends after this year, but it also takes into account a significant number of layoffs to employees, and on another slide I'll show you what those positions have been identified as. But now, in order to be able to have an ending fund balance that is above that 3% requirement, whoops, let's go back. You can see that we start out with the same ending fund balance of over 18%, then it goes down to between 11 and 12%, and then we maintain it at a little bit over 4%. The structural deficit is still rather huge, but not to the extent that we fall below the 3%. So how did we do that? How did we manage to stay above 3% at the end of 2014-15? It's not a pretty picture. These are the positions that we are assuming we would eliminate. Now, no action has been taken at this time. It'll be up to the board to take official action when it's time to give layoff notices. But we've identified these positions that have been funded either through our parcel tax and a couple of them through general fund funding that would have to be eliminated based on these assumptions. The very first one you can see is a large number of teachers. The difference between elementary, kindergarten through 3rd grade, 20 students per class, which we currently have, and 30 per class, which is the largest amount we would budget for, is 23 teachers. Right now, our class size reduction is accomplished with 8 teachers over that 30-to-1 at Marengo, 8 teachers at Arroyo Vista, and 7 teachers at Monterey Hills. If we assume we go to 30-to-1, we would be laying off 23 elementary teachers. Also, at the high school level, we currently have 20-to-1 in 9th grade English. Well, if we go back up to 32-to-1, which is what our contract calls for next year in high school classes, that would be 2 teachers, about 1.6 full-time equivalents, but that equates to 2 teachers. We would be also eliminating 2 of our remaining elementary arts teachers that are funded by the parcel tax, the drama teacher and the music teacher. We would eliminate, based on these assumptions, 1 high school counselor, which would take us down from 4 to 3. We would be eliminating the library clerk position at the middle school, the elementary library technicians that keep our libraries open at the elementary schools, and the elementary computer aides that keep our computer labs running. These are the positions that we've identified as being presently supported by the parcel tax. The two other positions that we've identified for elimination are not supported by the parcel tax, but we could no longer afford to keep those going in the worst case scenario either. We have one counselor that we've added that is half-time at the middle school and half-time at the high school. That's an intervention counselor. That position would have to be eliminated. And we have an academic coach in the area of mathematics. And this position has helped us toward one of our district's focus goals in mathematics. We'd have to eliminate that position as well. So, we have identified in the district that whether or not Prop 30 or Prop 38 might pass, we have to look ahead with the parcel tax due to sunset at the end of 2012-13. We want to maintain those positions and we want to maintain the programs that the parcel tax has supported. We have determined we will be going out to the voters and we will be asking for renewal of the parcel tax. So in June of 2012, we did some polling, or I should say we had a consulting company come in and do some polling. And we asked about 340 people who were polled if they would support a parcel tax, renewal of our parcel tax, with some of the measures that you can see there in place. To protect the quality of education and minimize further cuts, to maintain manageable class sizes, to attract and retain highly qualified teachers, to keep classroom technology up to date, which means probably adding technology when it's required, and to continue funding advanced programs in math, science, and technology, and the arts. Given all those items, we even asked the public, would you support a parcel tax if we increase the current rate from $288 a parcel by an additional $98 a parcel? And you will see the results. The results of the polling, which by no means translates automatically to what the voters will tell us, we have quite a bit of work to do, but the polling told us that with those assumptions and with an additional $98 per parcel, if that were added to the parcel tax, we would have a total of about 80% of the voters who were polled saying either definitely yes or probably yes, they would support the parcel tax. It requires a 2/3 vote, which is about 67%. So we consider this to be highly favorable. And in fact, our polling company said this was the most favorable results they have seen. There was another question that really translates into people's willingness to support the parcel tax. And that was, how did the people who were polled rate the quality of education as well as the district's handling of our finances in the district? And we were pleased to see a very positive response there. You can see it was about almost 55% said excellent and 31% said good, because it's critical that the public have confidence in the district and feel that we're providing an excellent education if we're going to ask the voters to renew the parcel tax. Now, we asked a series of questions about the kinds of programs that people would support or expect to have the parcel tax support if they were to vote for it. And you can see a large number of programs mentioned. The ones that I will highlight are just the ones that received the highest percentage of positives. This would be to continue funding music, visual arts, and performing arts program, an extremely high response to that. To continue and probably even to advance funding of advanced math, science, and technology programs. To maintain manageable class sizes. And you'll notice we didn't say 20-to-1 in grades K-3 because we've discovered that the result of maintaining 20-to-1 in those grades has been class sizes at the higher grades much too large. So our goal would be to keep class sizes as small as possible in all grade levels. And then you can see the various programs or uses of money that receive the most positive response. So what were some of the conclusions from the parcel tax renewal survey? We found that there is an unusually high support for renewal of the South Pasadena parcel tax because the quality of education is the most important issue to most voters. Given a choice of important issues, they identified the quality of education to be number one. We also found that voters have a very high opinion of the district's performance at this time. We found that there is solid and latent support for a parcel tax to fund educational programs and services. We found that there are some very popular projects and services that voters support and want to maintain and do not want to lose those programs. And we found that voters find the rationale for the renewal of the parcel tax to be compelling. Now, one thing I'll point out is voters, or those who were polled, were asked for their level of support at different rates. I mentioned $98 above the current $288 per parcel, but voters were also asked, how about if that was about half that much, all the way down to the current rate of $288. What we found is that there was very little difference in support. There was only a couple of percentage points of difference of a higher support when the rate of parcel tax went down to the current $288. Now, the district has not made any decision yet on what the parcel tax rate is likely to be, nor have we made any decisions, any firm decision on what programs the parcel tax will be likely to support. And there's a very good reason for that. The outcome of the November 6th election will have a really important impact on the district's financial situation, as well as which programs we think a parcel tax would need to support. If Proposition 30 passes and we have stable funding, we don't lose the $457 per pupil, we can assume that the parcel tax would support the current programs with perhaps a couple of minor changes. If, on the other hand, Proposition 30 doesn't pass, and we lose the $2 million to our budget from the mid-year trigger cuts, we would have to probably reframe how the parcel tax would be used. And one of the factors might simply be to keep the current full school year, because there is a possibility, and the governor has supported this notion, that if Proposition 30 doesn't pass and schools lose the revenue, that with the approval of employee associations, we shorten the school year by a considerable number of days. So there are some things that would depend very much on what happens on the November 6th election. If we have stable funding with Proposition 30 passing, there will be a very different use of parcel tax funds than if that money is not there. Now, there are some other slides, and I'm going to ask Dr. Price to come on up and talk a little bit about these. He's put some nice charts together, and then we'll be very happy to answer some questions as well.
So you've heard a lot tonight about Proposition 30, 38, and parcel tax. And what it comes down to is revenues that the district does or does not receive that we can put towards our students in education. I've got to apologize for my voice a little bit beforehand. I had a cold this weekend, so I apologize. So I was asked to put on one chart what this all means, and it really actually took 4 charts. So we'll start out with this chart. This is how we started out our budget year with our revenues. You can see there's 3 or 4 different pots of revenue. We have federal revenue that comes in, other state revenue, we've got local revenues, and then here's our revenue limit that's been talked about quite a bit tonight. Now, remember that alligator chart that Mr. Shapiro shared with you? If we actually got what we should statutorily, this large red void that we have here would actually be part of our revenues, but we don't see that because the state doesn't have the money to fund us. So you can see the void that that creates without mentioning any of the propositions. If Proposition 30 does not pass, that large block that we had of the revenue limit that you saw before gets chopped. One of the questions was, how much would that affect you and your revenues overall in the district? And if you look at it as a percentage of our revenue limit, excuse me, you can see once again that that's a huge took a 10% chop off of our revenue limit. If you look at what all of our revenues are together, which is about $34 million, you can see what type of a percentage we're talking about then. Now, where does Prop 38 fit in with this? Prop 38 is outside of our revenue stream, so we put it to the outside. This is, for our fiscal year 2012-13. If Prop 38 passes, from what we understand, there's the possibility that there may be $1.9 million of revenue, and we could take this slice and put it in to fill in one of these holes here. It's still, as Jonathan didn't get into the details, but if you go through and you read their analysis, it's still not certain whether or not that money will actually appear and be available for this particular year, the budget for 12-13. We're hoping that would be the possibility. So you can see our revenue pie and what we've been dealing with as a district. Now, where does the parcel tax fit in? Parcel tax is a part of our local revenues here. It's still there for the 12-13 current year, but as we move to the next year, if that's not renewed, that's another slice of revenue that our district is left without. So each one of these becomes important. Now you can see that Prop 38, the amount of slice that would be able to come and fill in if it does pass would be higher according to the estimates from Our Children, Our Future. So as I said, it took me 4 slides, but I wanted to give you a visual of what that meant. If we look at the difference between Prop 30 and 38, Jonathan talked about these, so I'm not going to go into those. To our district, the difference, Prop 30 means about $2 million if it fails in reduction. Prop 38 may mean in 12-13, $1.9 million. It would mean $2 million to us in 13-14, and in Prop 38, they're estimating $3.7 million. Now, how much would that increase later on? On the Our Children, Our Future website, there's some estimates that Prop 38 would grow. Jonathan talked about how Prop 30 would grow. It would benefit also by raising the Proposition 98 funding levels and increasing the income to the district. These other pieces below, once again, are interesting. They still leave us a lot of questions. The distribution, Prop 30, we understand how we'll get it, how it comes. It comes directly into the channels that we're used to receiving. The board is able to distribute that money based on need, based on instructional programs and what needs to happen. Prop 38, it goes directly to the school sites. There's still some questions with that. We don't understand. It's in the form of grants, different types of grants. Its purpose and how it's used and whether or not it's able to be used among school sites is still unclear to us. So we don't understand the structure still. I'm sure that there's a lot that would have to be worked out if that passes. So that's basically in short form.
There's one piece I didn't mention that I realized I should mention, and that is what will happen in the current school year regarding furlough days and possible reduction of the school year with these 2 propositions. So let me take a minute and talk about that. We actually have written into our current calendar 4 furlough days for all of our staff members. 2 of those would be non-teaching days, professional development days. 2 of them would be teaching days where students attend. The reason we don't know if we will need to use those furlough days is they are tied directly to our per pupil revenue limit funding. If Proposition 30 passes and we maintain the current level of revenue limit funding, then our current agreements say we won't need to take those furlough days. Our funding will manage to maintain a full school year, and our employees won't lose 4 days of work. If Prop 30 doesn't pass, there's an automatic trigger in our district language with our employee groups, and we would take the 4 furlough days. There'd be 2 fewer days that students attend, and a total of 4 fewer days of work and 4 fewer days of pay for all of our employees. Now, the furlough days are only written into the contract through this year. So sometimes people have asked, well, what about in the future years? Would you take more furlough days to save money? Would you hope to save money through other cuts in compensation? And I think the word there is hope, because nothing is guaranteed on anything that has to be negotiated. We would sit down with our employees. We took a look at that long list of positions that might be laid off and the services that would be cut, and we would essentially say to our teachers group and our group of classified employees, help us. In order to avoid laying off all these positions, what can we do to save some money in salaries, either through across-the-board salary reductions or more furlough days in future years? But again, that has to be negotiated, so you notice we cannot put that in our budget because that's very uncertain. So I just wanted to make sure we understood that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just one more point. There was a question for Jonathan that I wanted to go back and answer. The question from the audience is, how come the advertising against Proposition 30 says there's no new revenue for schools? And the reason why that is because you can see that what happens if Prop 30 fails is a reduction. What happens if Prop 30 passes is that piece that would be reduced stays funded. So that's the short answer to the way that the advertising against Prop 30 uses the language that it uses.
Okay. So some questions?
Yes. I think I'm going to let you two stand over here, and I'm going to be on that side.
However you want to do it.
The logistics are a little bit better.
Raise up the screen and then all can be seated.
I'm fine.
We're okay, I think. We're okay. Thank you, though. That's good. The questions reflect a general concern about government spending and government taxes and so I'm going to go through them, even though I think you've answered them. So I'll let you know what the people are worried about. When you say a funding cut, does that relate to scheduled expected increases?
Actually, you saw on that alligator chart, some of what we've talked about is a difference between cuts versus what we did receive, and some of it is cuts versus what we were expected to receive with statutory increases. So it's been a combination of both. But we no longer count on any of those statutory increases since we haven't received those in the last 4 years. So now when we talk about cuts, they would actually be dollars we currently have that we would lose.
It says here that, does South Pasadena Unified School District need to keep a 3% reserve? I heard there was flexibility in reserves.
Current language would require by the end of 2014-15 the 3% reserve. There was some relief temporarily, but it does not extend to 2014-15. So we are legally required, but it's more than a legal requirement. It's a question of reasonableness. If you can see the extent of our structural deficit, falling anything below a 3% reserve would be disastrous, because that means we would really have trouble paying our obligations to our employees and others. So it's not only a legal requirement, it's a responsible decision to maintain actually more than the 3%, but we would not go below
we get parcel tax and Proposition 30, no, I'm sorry. If both parcel tax and Proposition 30 fail, why not decrease pay levels and not positions?
I talked to that a little, but I'll go into more detail. If it were up to those of us in this room, we might do that, but you can't reduce pay levels without negotiating that. And that means employees have to willingly take a pay cut or take it in the form of either an across-the-board pay cut or furlough days, less pay for fewer days worked. And because that has to be negotiated, we can't put that into our budget. But it is an option if our employee groups are willing to take pay cuts or willing to take furlough days or some other form of compensation cut. That can mean fewer layoffs. But again, we can't put something in the budget that's unknown.
This person is asking about on the list of reductions, what administrative positions would be eliminated?
Currently, we haven't seen any to eliminate because we are generally understaffed in administrators compared to other school districts. And I'll give you an example of that. We currently have our middle school with over 1,100 students right now, and they have one principal and one assistant principal. In most middle schools that we're aware of that size, they have 2 assistant principals. At our high school, we have 1 principal and 2 assistant principals. Likewise, most schools of that size would have additional administrative staff. It's also true at our elementary schools, where we have a couple of elementary schools over 700. In many districts, they would have an assistant principal. We do not. So we haven't cut these positions, we simply have not added the positions that would have provided that full kind of service, but we really don't see where we would be able to cut administrative positions at this time.
Question for Scott Price. What percentage of the South Pasadena Unified School District's budget goes to pensions and other benefits?
Overall benefits, I think I took all the detail out of this chart. Okay, so I took the detail out of the chart for tonight, but I want to talk a little bit about how Jonathan couched the question. And that is, we are currently on a pay-as-you-go for our retiree health benefits, which are the only pension benefits that we have other than the regular STRS program that other districts have. I'll be glad to answer that question in details with dollar amounts. I'd have to bring my 200-page budget with me to give you those exact figures, but I'd be glad to do that on the website.
I'll add one other thing.
Yes.
This is not a percentage answer, but I'll tell you what we pay as a maximum per employee for benefits, because that I do know. We currently have in our contract for both our teachers and our classified that they get the equivalent of the HMO plan, which the HMO plan we offer is Kaiser, plus 1 dependent as the maximum amount that we pay, and that could be applied toward any of the selections of health benefits they choose. That comes to about $10,700 per year in benefits. So when you look at total employee costs, and our average teacher salary is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $75,000. Then you have to add the benefits, and those are just the health benefits. There are other statutory benefits we pay too, but that kind of gives you an idea of how the benefits fit into our total compensation. Cutting those benefits is also a possibility, but again, that would have to be negotiated.
I really can't read this. Someone wrote with pink pen. Yes. Would you like to stand up and tell me what it says?
I got the card back, if you don't mind. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, fine, you might not get the pink.
Yeah.
Mr. Shapiro, you said, you quoted numbers of South Pass per pupil spending compared to the state. I was curious with various variables. I was curious how that went, compared to the rest of the country. Correct. The question is, how do we compare to the rest of the state? That's one of the questions.
You know, I don't have that information available. That's something else we could put on the website. What I can tell you is we're a little bit lower, and the reason we're a little bit lower is we don't qualify for some of the categorical programs that many school districts receive, specifically if they have large numbers of students on free and reduced lunch and large numbers of English learners and some other specialized programs that generate the categoricals. We call ourselves a low-funded district because we get so little in state and federal categoricals compared to some others. So I don't have the exact amount, but in our case, that revenue limit of about $5,200 a year really comprises the vast majority of our per pupil funding, whereas in some school districts, it may only be about half.
If you don't mind, I have another question. I'm curious what efforts the district was making in worst case scenario when props fall through and Parcel fall through to get donations from alumni and other folks of means.
Yeah, it's a good point. One thing we didn't discuss in detail because our budget is so complicated is that we already built into our budget continuing donations that we receive from our foundation, South Pasadena Educational Foundation. Typically, the county office does not let you build donations into your budget because they may change from year to year, but because our foundation has been very constant with over $500,000 a year in annual donations, we have actually included that. So we haven't added donations that we have not yet gone after in terms of other groups, but really SPEF is our main funding organization that seeks donations, and we have continually put a minimum of $500,000 a year in donations from SPEF into our budget. So it is there.
That's very impressive. The final question will be for Jonathan again. Jonathan, if you don't mind just standing up where you are to answer this. Please contrast the transparency provisions of 38 and 30.
So that's a very good question. Thanks for asking it. Prop 38 does a great deal in terms of having accountability and transparency provisions, specifically that Prop 38 requires that all the dollars that are spent that are Prop 38 dollars be accounted for in very particular ways, which I could explain to you if we had a bit more time, but just very, very specific provisions. But then beyond that, there's something more, I would suggest even more important, which is that all dollars under Prop 38, there would be a requirement that does not exist currently. That is, for example, at the state level, I look at data all day that looks at district level spending and district level revenues. That's actually what you're looking at there. That's what's called SACS data. It's a way that the accounting provisions work. But we actually at the state level can't see what actually happens at a school site level. So we could actually look at LA Unified, which has 25% of all the students in the state, and we can't actually see what's happening with any individual school within LA Unified. What Prop 38 would require is that all school sites report out and publicly report out. It has to be reported on a website. It's very specifically provisioned for that you would actually be able to see on school. Yeah, sorry about that. So anyway, I'm not going to repeat all that, but there are very specific provisions in Prop 38 about transparency around how school budgets are reported. And when I say school budgets, that's school site budgets, not district budgets. So there's a big difference between how school districts are reporting out information and what happens at a school site level. So there are definitely transparency issues as relates to Prop 38 that way. There are accountability provisions in Prop, so that same reporting provision does not exist in Prop 30, so there's a distinction between the two ballot initiatives in that regard. In terms of accountability, the Prop 30 does specify that dollars are to be spent in K-12 schools, a specific amount of the overall dollars that are raised by Prop 30, as I explained before, 89% to K-12 schools, 11% to community colleges, and there are accountability provisions in that regard. But in terms of the level of specificity, and some people consider this an advantage in Prop 38, some people might not, especially depending if you're a school district, and the level at which reporting actually is required is quite specific. For example, dollars per teacher, increases over time, year-to-year changes. There's a lot of different provisions. So it's very prescriptive, not only how the dollars are spent, but also how they're reported out. So that is definitely a distinction between Prop 30 and Prop 38. Did that answer the question?
Thank you.
Yvonne, I have one more, just one last comment.
Okay.
I probably could have led with this comment, but it's probably just as appropriate that I finish with it. There have been people asking, well, school superintendent or members of the Board of Education, which one should we vote for? And so I can tell you that we are not in a position where we can advocate for one versus the other. It's very complicated. There are different factors that would indicate what will happen if Prop 30 doesn't pass versus what will happen if Prop 38 doesn't pass. Our Board of Education has approved a resolution that supports both. And the reason we've supported both is we do not ever want to take a chance on losing possible funding. We urge the voters, and the Board of Education has urged the voters to support both. Having said that, I'm going to express a personal opinion, which is not favoring one versus the other, but my personal opinion is it's really a shame that we have two competing ballots. My fear, my greatest fear, and probably not the people in this room, because I think you probably have a better handle on how these propositions can help us than most voters would. My greatest fear is two competing ballots can undermine the chances of either passing. And I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But if it does happen, I think we will all be the losers. So the very fact that there are competing ballots on the competing measures on the November 6th ballot is a very scary proposition. I would urge people in here not to be swayed by one versus the other in that respect, but to do what our board has urged and to be supportive of both. And then let's hope that the voters in California see the value in both of these. And they won't both go into effect. The one that receives the most votes, if they both pass, would go into effect. But I would hate to take votes away from either one of these. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Aren't we lucky to have all this expertise shared with us? I really appreciate it.